Today we're going to look at what may be the ugliest technique John Brzenk has ever used. Technique that is so gross it almost looks like Michael Todd from back in the day. Normally, John Brzenk is known for having some of the best technique in the history of the sport. His ability to keep all of his fundamentals at the same time stands far above the rest of the crowd. John is one of the few guys who had a world-class top roll and could then switch at a moment's notice to a world-class hook. Most pullers have a really good top roll and then an okay hook, for example. John has an amazing top roll, an amazing hook, and an amazing transitional press. This is already incredibly rare, but also John's ability to seamlessly move in and out of these techniques mid-match is probably unmatched by anyone else in arm wrestling. So clearly, John is not someone who is limited by not having enough options. If one move doesn't work, that's fine, because he has another move he can go to that probably will. All of this means that it is very rare for the lane the match takes place in to be dictated by John's opponent. It's almost always dictated by John. But one time at the Arnold Classic Festival in 2008, this was not the case at all. This tournament was just not John's day. John got forced into a position where he legitimately had no good options. Pretty early on in the tournament, we see John go up against Ryan Espy, or at least it looks like Ryan. The footage was shot on an injured toaster. But anyway, John handles him pretty easily. Later on, we see him go up against Don Underwood, who has wins on Devin Larratt right-handed. John takes full control of the high ground and forces Don to hold on to him. Don is unable to do this, so John takes this one with relative ease. John continues to climb through the bracket until he gets to Tim Breznin. John fully commits to the outside move and allows the slip to happen instead of holding on outside of straps. Inside of straps, although John loses his own wrist, he takes Tim's wrist as well. John has a solid connection through the strap that allows him to obtain the high knuckle position even without his wrist. John drives back and sideways and Todd rolls Tim Breznin for the win. And then the legendary match happens. John Brzenk versus Richard Lubkes. John is certainly the more technically proficient puller, but Richard is just so ridiculously overpowered. Technique only matters if the strength levels are close enough, and that was the question in this match. Initially, we see John rolling out for the top roll and Richard is trying to hold on. This position is probably more efficient for John since Richard is taxing his cup quite a bit, but eventually the slip happens. Now inside of straps, it's a bit hard to tell exactly what both guys were going for, but it does look like John initiates the hook by supinating and bringing his shoulder slightly forward. But at the same time, Richard doesn't really seem to be trying to block the hook either, but he is trying to keep his pronation. We're kind of in no man's land here. Not in a full hook, but not in a full top roll either. John's wrist isn't fully bent, but Richard doesn't have his full pronation either. Throughout the match, Rich slowly flattens out John's wrist more and more until eventually he takes it entirely. But John continues to hold on, now with no pronation, no wrist flexion, and not much of an elbow flexor. Pretty much, John's arm not snapping in half is the only thing preventing the pin at this point. Rich continues to adjust his position, and eventually he is able to pin John in a top roll lane. Looking back at the start of the match, it isn't all that terrible for John initially, since John at least has his cup engaged. But as the match goes on, John loses his cup and loses even more of his shoulder commitment to the degree that he is in full break arm position. John ends up placing third in this tournament behind Tim Breznin and of course Richard Lubkes, who won the tournament. This goes down in my mind as probably the ugliest technique I've ever seen from John Brzenk, but at the same time, one of the coolest techniques I've ever seen from John. This is because John didn't choose to use this technique on purpose, but what it shows is that John was willing to break his arm in order to win this match. Let me know in the comments if you agree that this is the craziest arm break position John has ever been in, or can you think of an even uglier one? It's crazy to think that John has put so much wear and tear on his arms over the years, yet he is still competing at an elite level even to this day.